The first two stories here are submitted by subscribers of this channel. The third story is one submitted by somebody very close to me who wished to convey the horror he experienced going through the discovery of his Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. I need to warn you that it is rather disturbing as it details a person completely losing his mind, and that it might be a good idea to listen with caution. The scariest thing in this world is mental illness, and this is a sharp portrait of a man's mental illness. I don't say that lightly because, as I've mentioned before, I am a psychologist, so I take this very seriously. Please enjoy the videos. The Trapdoor. You ever have one of those older brothers who likes to pull mean pranks on you and tries to scare you to death? You know the type I'm talking about. The kind of older brother who tries to convince you that a monster is under your bed or that the boogeyman lives in the closet. Do you know anyone who had an older brother like that? Well, I didn't have one. I had a younger brother who was like that. My little brother Tommy was not only 3 years younger than me, but he was also a very tiny thing. Physically, he was not threatening in the least, but mentally, he had an imagination that could scare the shit out of people 3 or 4 times his age. The worst thing he ever tried to do to me happened when we lived in a house in a new subdivision. After we had moved in, all 4 of us kids got our own room for the first time in our lives. Being the second oldest, I got the second choice of bedrooms. The room that I picked was not only the second biggest, but it had another feature that I really enjoyed. It was very unique to the other rooms in the house. There was a trapdoor in the closet that led under the house. Although it was really weird, I actually thought it was pretty neat. The door led to what you might call a crawl space, but it wasn't really so shallow that you would have to crawl in it. A human being could easily stand straight up and under the house with no problem. My brother Tommy loved the trapdoor and was actually very mad at me for getting what he felt was the most interesting feature in the entire house. After a month after we moved in, he was still trying to get me to trade rooms with him so we could have the trapdoor in his closet. After that month of refusing, he finally snapped and got angry with me. "Fine. If you don't want to trade rooms with me, then I'll leave you and Matilda alone," he told me. With that, Tommy turned and began to leave the room. Although I should have known better, I had to ask Tommy what he was talking about. "I'm talking about Matilda," Tommy replied. "She's a homeless woman who lives in the crawl space. She actually was squatting in the house before we moved in, and once we showed up she had to hide under this house. I figured I'd be nice and try to take this room off your hands since I'm not as big a chicken shit as you are. But you want her, you can stay in the room where she has the most direct access to the house." With that, Tommy turned and left the room. I had to give it to my little brother. He had outdone himself that time. But while his story did indeed give me the creeps, I knew it was just his attempt to get me to trade bedrooms with him, and I was not about to give in. Well, Tommy didn't give in either. He began taunting me on a daily basis about this Matilda lady. He described her as an ugly, fat old bag lady dressed in a ratty blue dress. He told me that he would talk to her, and she told him that she would come up into the house when the family wasn't home to get food. She would then take that food back into the basement or crawl space, whatever you want to call it, and she would cook it over an open fire. Tommy told me that he told Matilda how much he wanted my room, and once he even asked her if she would help him get it from me. According to Tommy, Matilda agreed that she would eventually help Tommy scare me out of the room. But she had to pick the time, not him. It was in fact a brilliant tactic on the part of my brother, as it left it really open-ended as to when his imaginary woman would attack me. That was his attempt to keep me on edge all the time. My brother was brilliant, I told you. When I still didn't budge, my brother stepped up his torment. He started doing something to me every night before bedtime. In a sing-song voice, he would taunt me by telling me, "Matilda lives in the crawl space." Even though I really did not believe him, it did unnerve me as I lay in bed. I always looked at the closet and at that trap door as I went to sleep. I heard the voice of my little brother in my head as he told me over and over again, "Matilda lives in the crawl space." My brother's head games did begin to work, but that wasn't enough to give in to him. In fact, it had just the opposite effect. I was more determined to resist him because he had found an effective way to get to me. About a week after my brother had his little singing taunt, he came to my room and again was bugging me about Matilda. Right in the middle of his little game, though, we heard a noise. Tommy froze and then slowly turned and looked at the trap door. "What the hell?" he asked, fear appearing on his face for the first time, maybe in his life. The moment he said it, we both saw the trap door lift up a little bit. Tommy jumped and I scrambled up onto my bed. "Holy shit!" Tommy screamed and jumped up. "Oh my God, it must be Matilda!" I shouted. Tommy looked at me. "What the hell are you talking about? You know I made Matilda up just to get this room." I looked at Tommy and then over at the trapdoor and asked, "And what the hell is that?" Before either of us could answer, the trapdoor banged again. Tommy literally ran to the other side of the bedroom and cowered in the corner. My little brother, the king of horror, cowered in the corner. "I'm going to check it out, Tommy," I told my little brother as I got up off the bed. I slowly and cautiously began walking over to the trap door. "Don't," Tommy begged me. "I'm sorry I tried to scare you, but I had no idea what's in that crawl space. Don't go over there." I didn't listen. "You're my little brother, and it's my job to protect you," I told him. "If someone is down there, I have to find out who." Tommy actually began crying as I slowly approached the trapdoor. With every bit of caution, I leaned over and I slowly reached my hand out in order to grab the brass ring on the top of the door and pull the trapdoor open. As I did, the door was thrust open hard and a hand grabbed my wrist. I began screaming, and as I did, the hand pulled onto me. It was holding me tight and it did not let me go. Tommy was still screaming and crying and started screaming for our parents. Well, the noise and the commotion caused my parents to run into the room. They saw what was going on. My mom ran over to Tommy and held onto him. My dad came over and pulled open the trapdoor, revealing our older brother, Joseph, standing in the crawl space with a grin on his face, holding my arm. My dad looked over at me and saw a grin on my face as well. Remember when I said I didn't have an older brother who would torment and scare me? Well, I didn't. But Tommy sure did. I recently moved to Colorado because I've always heard such stories about its beauty, and I've always been a really big fan of nature. Well, the fact that they legalized pot in the past few years doesn't really hurt either, but that's really beside the point. I honestly had never seen the Rocky Mountains before, and I wanted to experience all the wonders of nature that John Denver was so ecstatic about that he had to write all those songs. Well, I wasn't disappointed. Colorado had a lot to appreciate. In addition to the mountains and the forests and everything else, I also noticed that Colorado has a lot of tunnels. I suppose it makes sense. When you have so many mountains, you have to have a lot of tunnels. I was particularly fascinated, however, with the train tunnels. Unlike car tunnels, the train tunnels are not particularly well lit, and they are really only thin enough for the train to go through. There is a minor ledge on the side for a person to be up on in case they are in there with the train, but other than that, there's not much room. For some reason, I became fascinated with these tunnels, and I really wanted to try and walk through one of them just to see what it would be like. They were very old, looking like they had been constructed in the 19th century for all I knew. I just found that fascinating. Now, before I go any further, I need to tell you that what happens in this story has nothing to do with the train. I didn't accidentally go into the tunnel when a train was supposed to be coming and then had to run to the exit, only to get out there in the nick of time, and for me to wonder if only I'd been 1 second slower. I actually looked up the train schedule online and was able to find a time period where there were no scheduled trains running through the tunnel for almost an entire day, and that was the perfect time for me to go and explore this train tunnel. And it was a particularly long one. Getting to the tunnel was a little difficult though. Although there were no barriers, there was a lot of traffic on the interstate, and it all went through the mountains, of course. I was headed towards the tunnel in the middle of the day, so I didn't have the cover of darkness to conceal me. I wasn't brave enough to try to go into a train tunnel at night. I put on an orange vest because, at the very least, it made me look like I was official. I got to the tunnel without much incident, and held my breath as I went to venture in. It was really neat, and really light at first. But as I mentioned, this was a really long tunnel, and there were no lights in it. Once I was far enough away from the entrance, I would be in the pitch dark. I brought along my flashlight, but I sort of wanted to see how long it would take me to get to that dark part without using it. As I started walking down the tunnel and into the mountain, the light behind me gradually got dimmer and dimmer. I knew I had a lot of time, so I wasn't in a hurry. However, eventually the tunnel winded and I was in the pitch dark. It was pretty awesome, I have to tell you. I took out my flashlight and shone it as I went along. It was so dark, however, that the puny little beacon barely made an impact. After I had been walking for a while in the dark, I heard a noise off into the tunnel. It sounded like someone else was walking, but I doubted that could be the case. The chances that someone else was walking through a train tunnel at the same time that I was pretty unlikely. However, only moments later, I heard it again. It definitely sounded like steps, and it was coming from the direction I was walking in. I wondered if it might be an animal or something, and I immediately got concerned. I didn't know all the wildlife that was in Colorado. I was walking through a narrow tunnel deep into a mountain, and it might not be easy to get away unless I was to find a ring and turn invisible. I considered turning around and going back as I kept hearing that sound over and over. As I stood there, I heard what was definitely the same clacking sound of shoes that I was making as I was walking. but it was coming from deeper in the tunnel. I was in a quandary. The ledge I was walking on wasn't very wide. If I turned and walked away out of the tunnel, I would be turning my back on what could potentially be a dangerous person. It would be difficult to defend myself. But if I kept walking forward, I could be simply presenting myself to that dangerous person. I really didn't know what to do. As I stood there waiting, I wasted a lot of time as I heard the footsteps coming closer and closer. I still was not sure what to do. Finally, I took the flashlight and shone it down the tunnel. It took several moments, but I finally saw a figure approaching. It was a hunched-over person whose face looked very morose, with his eyes closed. He was a pallid gray color, but I figured that might just be because of the dark. I was frozen as he got closer and closer to me. Eventually, he stopped, and then the most terrifying thing happened. He moved his head, and I realized that it wasn't his head at all. He was holding a decapitated head in front of his own. He took the head and put it into the large bag he was holding. His real face smiled at me, and the man asked, "Want to join my head collection?" I turned and booked out of that tunnel like you could not believe. I have no idea if the man was following me, but even if he was much smaller and older than I was, and I doubted he could keep up. I didn't really care, however. I just ran and ran and ran and didn't stop until I not only reached the end of the tunnel, but went through the opening, got to my car, and then drove off onto the interstate. I don't know what the hell happened and how that man got a human head, but I know I will never go into a train tunnel again. Scrupulosity. I want to share this story because there could be other people out there who suffer from this affliction and do not know there is actual medical terminology and treatment for it. Perhaps by knowing the hell I went through, other people can find help. I have Obsessive Compulsive Disorder and a very specific version called Scrupulosity. Before I go on, OCD is not some mental illness that makes you clean or ordered. It is an anxiety disorder characterized by two things: irrational and very unpleasant ideas, and rituals or compulsions that temporarily ease the anxiety. The rituals are not pleasant to perform and can often be as anxiety-provoking as the obsessions are. Scrupulosity is a version of OCD that revolves around religious obsession, mostly focused around committing blasphemy or doing things that would result in one going to hell. When I was 10 years old, I saw the movie with George Burns called Oh God, You Devil. From that point on, I became obsessed with the idea of selling one's soul to the devil. And no, it was not pleasant thoughts about selling my soul in order to get riches or fame. It was always selling my soul to get something bad that I didn't want to happen. Usually, I would get scared that I would accidentally sell my soul to the devil and cause one of my family members to die. As I got older, it permeated my entire life. I would begin getting scared that I would sell my soul to affect anything. Any important crossroads would be affected by this. Any non-important crossroads, school tests, would I fail because I got an F? Relationships, would my boyfriends leave me because I sold my soul to make it happen? Jobs. Would I not get a job, or would I get fired because I accidentally sold my soul to make it happen? These were things that I thought of constantly. My entire life became all about keeping these things from happening. My rituals to keep these things from happening would be constant prayer that they would not happen. But not only did I have to constantly pray, I had to pray exactly right. If the thoughts in my head in any way would stray from the point of the prayer, I might accidentally pray for something else, and something worse would happen. I had to do all my praying in my head, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to function in the real world, because I wasn't just doing this every now and then. I was doing these things every minute of every single day. I did bad in high school because I was unable to shake the thoughts long enough to work hard. I was accused of being grumpy in jobs and passed up for promotions because my bosses always thought I was angry and unpleasant. But I wasn't. I was suffering constantly, and they never did a single thing to help it get better. My life was a constant hell. For the most part, though, I was able to manage it enough. The only time I couldn't is when I heard a certain word. This is not a word I can write, but it's the S word that people use to describe the devil. Whenever I hear that word, I go off into such an extreme downward spiral that I often get locked up in compulsion rituals for hours. It causes me so much anxiety that I sometimes lose complete control, curl up in a ball, and just cry until I feel better. In 2003, knowing that I am a fan of horror movies, a friend of mine who did not know about my affliction, which is not really a surprise because I was too scared to tell anyone, suggested I watch the Rob Zombie movie House of 1000 Corpses. I did, not knowing that the main killer in the movie was named Dr. that S word that I cannot tell you. And I couldn't turn the film off because I was watching it with a friend who was enjoying it. And not only that, the film was just nasty. It included a scene where a man was slowly tortured, had his arm cut off with one swipe of an axe, and his dead body was sewn into the body of a walrus. And I was scared because they kept saying the name over and over again. Although I was disturbed by watching the movie, it only got worse later when I went to bed. I was so anxious that I had to say a prayer to feel better. And then it happened. My mind convinced me that I had sold my soul to the devil, and not just for anything. I thought I sold it to be tortured and killed, just like that guy I described in the movie. I spent the next 6 hours rolling over and over in bed trying to nullify the soul selling with prayers, but that just made it worse. My constant trials to nullify it resulted in me giving a date for it. September 22nd, a date that I will never forget. I couldn't shake it. It became my life. I woke up in the morning knowing, not thinking, knowing my days were numbered. Every day was one day closer. It was a countdown to the day I was going to go to sleep and wake up, and I would be that man in that movie, and I was going to be tortured and killed and since I sold my soul, I would end up going to hell afterwards, where I would likely have this happen to me over and over again for eternity. Damn it. What made this all the more frustrating is that I didn't even really believe in hell. But that's the way OCD can work. You don't completely believe in what's happening, but there's always that chance that it's real, and that is what scares you. You never really know. I became disconnected with reality. Friends would take me out, and I would just sit there looking through them, not talking, looking past them, looking at September 22nd. Why should I talk? Every day, every moment, every second was just taking me closer to my inevitable torture and death, and then eternal repetition of that torture and death. September 22nd came closer and closer and closer. I began visualizing what would happen, and then began seeing clues and everything that only confirmed that this horrible thing was going to happen. I woke up in the morning, and I was waiting for my upcoming torture and death. I went to sleep at night, and I dreamt of my upcoming torture and death. Every moment I repeated the prayer ritual, trying to find the right combination of prayer and words that would finally ease the anxiety and let me know that I had successfully rescinded my deal with the devil, and that I would be alright. That feeling never came. I decided I must be schizophrenic. I called the doctor and got an appointment. The earliest appointment they could give me was on September 22nd. And that would be too late. Thinking I was schizophrenic had been a hope that made me feel slightly better. Schizophrenia is a psychiatric disorder, and there are pills that make it go away, or at least manage it. But when I couldn't get an appointment with a psychiatrist anywhere earlier than that date, I knew I was going to be murdered. I knew I was not schizophrenic. I knew what was going on was not a mental disorder. I repeat, I knew it. It had to be real. If it wasn't real, then why couldn't any doctor see me before the day I was going to die? 2 hours before midnight on September 21st, I decided to go to bed early. The torture of feeling this pain, this anxiety, and this fear was so overwhelming, I just gave up. I wanted to get it over with, and I went to sleep. And I woke up, and I was fine. And I went to the doctor, and I was diagnosed as a severe obsessive compulsive with a GAF score of 34. If you know what a GAF score is, you'll realize how scary that was. If you don't, educate yourself and look it up. I recovered slowly. The following year, on September 22nd, I relapsed a little. But it wasn't as bad as the year before. With medication and therapy, it got easier. And as time went on, I separated from the strange belief, and now looking back, it seems like nothing but a bizarre delusion of the past. But I listened to all these creepypastas and true scary Reddit stories, and there is nothing scarier than losing your grip on reality. It wasn't even the scenario that was scary, really. It was the fact that I totally and utterly believed it. If you ever go through something like this, if you ever feel your very sanity is slipping away, don't be afraid. People will think you're crazy. See a doctor and find help, because the more you lose your mind, the harder it is to crawl your way back. And there is nothing scarier than losing your mind. Trust me, I know. Hey all, this is Killer Orange Cat. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know the last story was really dark, but as a fellow diagnosed obsessive compulsive, I felt it was important to share this for several reasons. The majority of obsessive compulsives go undiagnosed and never get help because they are scared that people will think they're crazy. But trust me, if you are experiencing anything like the guy in the story, people thinking you are crazy is the least of your problems. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button next to my lovely mascot. I apologize for the lateness of this video. I realize I apologize for the lateness a bit. I ended up spending 4 full days last week on a bus because my buses kept getting cancelled over and over again. Between that and losing my luggage on the trip to Nevada to begin with, I will never, ever, ever, ever ride a Greyhound bus again, and I will spring for the airplane each time I travel in the future. It's more expensive, it is definitely worth it. It is complete and utter nightmare, and I don't recommend it to anybody. My next video will finally have some viewer submitted Kaidan, and I hope to have that out by Friday. I also have a little parody that I'm going to do of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. It'll be really short, but I think it's amusing, and I'll have that up soon as well, since the Christmas season is coming. I want to again thank everybody who subscribes. I am always flabbergasted at how quickly my channel keeps growing, and I hope that my stories can keep entertaining you. Other than that, I encourage you to check out my friend Joey's channel, Joey's Nightmares. It's in my recommended channels. He is a very, very good narrator who I think really deserves a lot more exposure than he's getting. Listen to his videos, you definitely will not regret it. I would also like to give a bit of a shout out to Basement Horrors and Truth is Scarier Than Fiction, 2 relatively young channels that I think the narrators have a lot of potential, and I would love to see them continue to grow and improve and just put on some really good videos. Other than that, there's only one thing left to say. You can check under the bed, and you can check in the closet, but it doesn't matter. When you go to bed, and when you're falling asleep, just remember, you're never truly alone.